The cross is a symbol synonymous with Jesus Christ himself, because as we know, Jesus was sentenced by the Romans to death by crucifixion.
A 60-foot-tall curtain, as thick as a man's hand and weighing tons, is torn in half from the top down inside a sealed temple. An earthquake targets a single hill with terrifying precision. A soldier whose job was to oversee the brutal execution suddenly declares the victim was the Son of God.
He sees a cross of light in the sky accompanied by the words, "Conquer by this." He becomes a true believer and converts Christian emperor.
These aren't separate events. They are pieces of a puzzle that all fit into the first 60 seconds after Jesus' final breath. We are about to connect these explosive moments and reveal a crucial detail about that day that has been hiding in plain sight. A planet in mourning. The first thing that happened within seconds of his spirit departing was a violent, earth-shattering tremor. This was no gentle rumble. The Gospel of Matthew describes it with blunt force. The earth shook and the rocks were split. Imagine being there. The jeering crowds who had gathered to mock the crucifixion were suddenly silenced. The ground beneath their feet began to heave and convulse. Roman soldiers, trained for unflinching discipline in the face of chaos, would have struggled to keep their footing. The very hill of Golgotha, a place of grim routine for Roman executions, was now the epicenter of a terrifying event. What many overlook is that this wasn't just any earthquake. Geologists today know that the Jerusalem area sits near the Dead Sea Transform, a major fault system. Earthquakes are a part of the region's history. But the thing nobody tells you is that scientific studies of sediment layers from the Dead Sea have in fact confirmed evidence of a major seismic event around the year 33 AD. But the wow factor isn't that an earthquake happened, it's when it happened. Eyewitness accounts place it at the very moment of Jesus' passing. It was a synchronicity so precise it defies coincidence. The ground didn't just shake, it reacted. In simple words, the force was catastrophic. The description of rocks were split points to a quake of significant magnitude, powerful enough to fracture solid bedrock. Boulders and loose stones on the hillside would have tumbled down, adding to the chaos and terror. For the people of the first century, an earthquake was never just a natural event. It was widely seen as a sign of divine judgment or intervention. The ancient Jewish prophets often wrote about God's presence being accompanied by the shaking of the earth. So for the onlookers, this was a terrifying message written in the language of creation itself. The planet seemed to be in agony, convulsing in response to the event that had just taken place upon its surface. This was the creator of the world departing, and the world he had made could not remain still. The solid, dependable ground had become unstable, a physical reflection of a spiritual reality that had been turned upside down. This cosmic tremor was just the opening act, in a minute packed with supernatural phenomena, and it was already preparing the stage for something even more unbelievable. The shaking ground was a sign of judgment, but it was also a tool. As the earth split and shuddered, it wasn't just surface rocks that were being moved. The quake's power reached into the ancient tombs, carved into the hillsides around Jerusalem, setting in motion the next mind-bending event of that first minute. The earthquake was terrifying, but what it uncovered would challenge the very meaning of life and death. An impossible tear. While the ground was still shaking outside the city walls, another impossible event was taking place in the most sacred place in Jerusalem, the Jewish temple. Inside its hallowed courts, far from the eyes of the public, the great veil that guarded the Holy of Holies was torn in two. But not all things are what they seem, for this was no ordinary curtain, and it wasn't torn in an ordinary way. The temple veil was a masterpiece of design and symbolism, a barrier meant to be permanent. According to the historian Josephus, it was a colossal structure, standing nearly 60 feet high and 4 inches thick. It was woven from a rich tapestry of blue, purple, and scarlet threads, so heavy that it reportedly took 300 priests just to move it. Its purpose was to separate a holy God from sinful humanity. Behind that veil was the Holy of Holies, the most sacred spot on earth where the presence of God was believed to dwell. No one was ever allowed to enter, except for the high priest, and he could only do so once a year on the Day of Atonement. To pass through that veil at any other time meant instant demise. At the exact moment Jesus breathed his last on the cross, this massive, indestructible curtain was ripped apart. The truly stunning detail, the part that sends shivers down your spine, is how it was torn. The Gospels are specific. It was torn from top to bottom. This is a crucial detail. A tear from the bottom up could suggest human hands, perhaps rioters, in the chaos of the earthquake. But a tear starting from the top 60 feet in the air signified something else entirely. It was as if an invisible divine hand had reached down and ripped it in half. The priests on duty in the temple that day would have been the first to witness it. Imagine their shock and horror. The most sacred object they were charged with protecting, a symbol of God's unapproachability that had stood for generations, was destroyed in an instant. The deafening sound of tearing fabric, followed by the sight of the hidden Holy of Holies, now exposed to the light, would have been an unbelievable sight. The earthquake might have shaken the temple's foundations, but this was an attack on the very heart of their religion. The symbolism was immediate and world-changing. The barrier was gone. The separation between God and humanity, which had defined religious life for centuries, was over. The death that had just occurred on that cross had paid the price, and this torn veil was the receipt. It was a divine declaration that access to God was no longer limited to a select few through complex rituals. A new and living way had just been opened for everyone. The tearing of the veil opened a path to God, but the earthquake had opened something far more literal. Death's first defeat. The earthquake that split the rocks of Golgotha did more than just terrify the living. Its shockwaves radiated outwards, plunging deep into the limestone hills surrounding Jerusalem, where the dead were laid to rest. In the first-century Jewish tradition, tombs were often caves, or chambers carved directly into the rock, sealed with a large, heavy stone rolled in front of the entrance. As the ground convulsed, these ancient resting places were violently broken open. Matthew's account is chillingly direct. The tombs also were opened. The stones, some weighing more than a ton, were dislodged from their positions, not by human effort, but by the raw power of the earth itself. The earthquake acted like a key, unlocking the doors that sealed the dead away from the world of the living. This was a stunning and unprecedented event. The sanctity of the grave, a place of final rest, was violated on a massive scale. For anyone who witnessed this, seeing the dark interiors of tombs exposed to the gloomy afternoon light would have been a terrifying and deeply unsettling sight. But the broken tombs were only the setup for the real wow factor. The scripture continues, and many bodies of the holy people who had passed away were raised. Now it's important to get the timeline right. The text clarifies that they appeared in the city after Jesus' resurrection. But the critical action, the raising of their bodies, began here, in the moments after his passing. His departure didn't just affect the natural world, it invaded the realm of the dead. It was as if his spirit, upon leaving his body, passed through the underworld and began to pull others out with him. This event was a dramatic foreshadowing, a preview of the victory over death that was to come. Many people are crazy about the idea of the resurrection, but they often picture it as a single event. The thing is, the Bible presents it as the beginning of a new creation. The raising of these saints, or holy people, likely revered figures from Israel's history, was the first evidence that death's grip was broken. Jesus is called the first fruits of the resurrection, meaning he was the first of a great harvest. These resurrected saints were the initial sprouts, proof that his sacrifice had the power to reverse the finality of the grave. The breaking open of the tombs served as a powerful, visible sign. While the torn veil symbolized spiritual access to God, the open tombs symbolized a physical victory over the ultimate enemy of humanity, death itself. The final barrier that no human could conquer was beginning to crumble. The dead were stirring, but it was a living man, a hardened soldier, who gave the most shocking testimony. A soldier's shock. At the foot of the cross, commanding the soldiers, stood a Roman centurion. This was a man who was no stranger to brutality. A centurion was a career soldier, a hardened commander of about 100 men, and the backbone of the Roman army. He had likely seen battle, enforced Roman law, and presided over dozens, if not hundreds, of crucifixions. For him, this was just another day at the office, a grim, messy, but routine part of his job. Executions were meant to be a show of Roman power, and his role was to ensure everything went according to plan. But this execution had been anything but routine. What many people don't realize is that this centurion had a front-row seat to the entire series of events. He had watched Jesus for hours, listening to him forgive his executioners and promise paradise to a thief. He witnessed the sky turn black at midday. He felt the ground beneath him split open in a violent earthquake. He would have heard the reports flooding in from the city about the temple veil being torn. The evidence was piling up, one supernatural event after another, creating a picture that his logical, military mind could not dismiss. The Gospels of Matthew and Mark record his stunning reaction. Seeing the earthquake and all that was happening, he was filled with awe. His professional detachment shattered. The man he had just watched pass away was clearly not just another rebel or criminal. The convergence of cosmic signs, all centered on this one man, pointed to a conclusion that was both terrifying and undeniable. In that moment, this pagan, polytheistic Roman soldier, a man who swore allegiance to Caesar and the gods of Rome, made a history-altering declaration. He exclaimed, "Truly this was the Son of God." To put it mildly, this was a monumental confession, one that shattered every expectation of the time. It wasn't a prophet or a disciple who made it, not even a devout follower whispering in the shadows. It was a Roman soldier, a Gentile, an outsider standing on the blood-stained ground beneath a darkened sky, a man whose hands, or at least his command, were directly tied to the execution itself. He wasn't there to pray or to mourn, he was there to kill. And yet, in that moment, surrounded by chaos and fear, he saw something that forced him to speak the unthinkable. This was not a sermon. It wasn't a philosophical debate or a quiet reflection in a temple. It was a declaration shouted into the wind, with the earth shaking beneath his feet and the heavens themselves seemingly torn apart. When the Roman centurion said, "Truly this was the Son of God," he wasn't making a poetic statement. He was describing what he had just witnessed, something so far beyond the normal order of the world that denial became impossible. For centuries, believers and skeptics alike have tried to explain what that man saw. Some say it was guilt, some say fear, others say divine revelation. But what's undeniable is the setting. This confession didn't come from a place of faith, but from the front line of doubt. The centurion had no reason to believe. He wasn't raised with the prophecies or the scriptures. To him, this was just another execution among hundreds, until it wasn't. The signs were unmistakable. The ground trembled as if the world itself recoiled. The sky darkened unnaturally, like creation mourning its own maker. People screamed, others fled. And in that chaos, something broke through his hardened soldier's shell. He had seen men die before, dozens, maybe hundreds, but never like this. Never with nature itself bearing witness. The crucified man didn't curse his executioners or beg for mercy. He forgave. He surrendered. He died with authority, not defeat. Did these events truly prove his divinity, or could there be a scientific explanation we're still missing? Let us know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.